Hi everybody, I am Jeffrey Hauser, author of the Learn With series. Thanks for checking these screencasts out. Today we're going to talk about writing tests against asynchronous code within an Angular application using Karma and Jasmine. This episode will show you how to write code using a done function. I have here the Learn With application. It's a task manager application which shows you how to build Angular if you read through my books step by step. And I'm going to hone in on a specific section of code here. So I'm going to log into the application, and where a promise comes in, if I create a new task, I'm using ng bootstrap library here, and when it creates this pop-up modal, it returns a promise so we can respond to the close. So creating a brand new task, and the same code is used for both creating a new task and editing a task. And I'm going to show you the code behind this. I have this method here. It's a private method inside this tasks component. What it does is it grabs the modal service, which is ngb modal. So it's a provider or a service that comes from this ng bootstrap library used strictly for opening modals. And we're opening one, and we're doing an instance of the task cu component, which is the pop-up for creating or updating a task. That's what the cu stands for there. We're passing in a title and a task instance, and then we listen to this result then. That's how we listen to promises. If you do a lot with Angular, you probably are aware it does a lot with observables, but doesn't usually use promises, but this library returns a promise. So when we close the modal, we pass the updated or brand new task object, and then we do some bunch of processing with it. Either if it was brand new, we basically add it to the task grid array and then refresh the grid. Otherwise, we replace the object inside the sort of task grid array with the new updated one. So these are the things that happen when we close the module. And if the pop-up is closed without, or canceled rather, we have this catch here, but in the code nothing happens with the catch. So I want to take a look at the test code. I went to split screen so we can see the code we're testing up top and the test code at the bottom. This often works better with a much bigger screen resolution, but we can deal with it for the purposes here. So a lot of this is set up by default by Angular, but we have an instance to the component inside the tasks component, and we have an instance of the fixture. We also added an instance of the ngb modal service. And after the test bed is compiled, I've already added in the relevant components needed. We're going to grab an instance of this test bed in the before each. Beyond that, we are going to, I created a describe block for open test window. And it's going to grab an instance of the ngb modal ref. This is a reference to the item that's popped up, the modal in the UI. We're going to call the modal service, which is a local value, and we're going to pass in the TCU component. Basically, within the test, we're replicating this first line of the open task method, and that gives us an instance of the ref that we can control in tests. So we can control when we close it. And then we're going to actually spy on the modal service open and return this modal ref instance that we control. So when the tests run in here, it's going to call this, and instead of calling that method and creating it, the spy is going to know to intercept it and return this own modal ref instance. From here, we're going to write our individual tests. Let's write the tests using a done function. Now, I already did it in part 1 using fake async. We're going to use a very similar approach here. In fact, we're going to be using the same assertions. So we should open modal and pass new task when closed using a done function. And so that's the test outline. What we're going to do here is we're going to pass a function. And you see IntelliJ automatically gives it a type of DONEFN for done function. This is a way within our test we can call this done function like this to say, hey, we're running this as an async test, but we've finished everything we need to do. So first, oh, whoops, what am I doing here? So this is just calling the method. Wow. There we go. This calls the method, our open task window method. And then we're going to create a task object, which we're going to pass in as the result. And as I did in the last one, I guess in the first section, I'm going to make use of one of my mock tasks. And when using fake async, we were able to use the tick function in order to move things forward. We're going to actually do this a bit differently in the context of using a done function. We're going to actually go back to the fixture and do a detect changes. And this is, instead of using a fake async way to force the rendering forward, this actually forces the rendering forward within the Angular context. And once we do that, we're going to wait. We want to do, when it's stable, we are going to want to do more things. So what the first detect changes does is it's the first rendering of the component. So that's going to build out all the children, etc., etc. And once that is stable, we are going to spy on the task grid. And this is that task grid refresh. We did something similar first time. And then we're going to go ahead and close it. But this isn't going to automatically run the result function. We are going to have to detect changes again. And because we're doing detect changes again, we're going to have to unstable. And it's in here. So this renders the components, all the child components, and makes this tasks component ready for execution. Once that's complete, the runStable function will execute. And that's when we're going to spy on the task grid. We can't spy on the task grid refresh method before the initial detect changes because that task grid method isn't defined yet. Then we call this modal ref close method, which is going to run this method, or actually run the result handler here. Then we call detect changes, and when it's stable, actually I guess the close method triggers this up for execution during the next sort of browser redraw cycle. And here we can add all our expectations. So we're going to expect component task grid tasks length to be 1. Uh, tasks 0 to equal task. And dot refresh to have been called. And then this is where we call the done function. Let's add some breakpoints in here. I'm going to do breakpoint at the beginning of the method and then in each when stable. When I run this code, it should fire off and we should go through. Because we have done Jasmine, Karma underneath the hood, know automatically to run this test within an async zone. And that's actually not a specific Angular thing, although accessing the fixture and detect changes is a specific Angular thing. So I ran to debug the code. Let's put a debugger here too. And it's going to chug for a bit. Launch open a browser. There we go. So first thing we do is we call the method, so it pops up to the open task window method in the component. And because this is a private method, we're actually using a sort of a JavaScript trick to be able to call it from within the test. So it's going to call modal service open, which once again we spy on, so it's going to return our modal ref. So that means we can control how the modal ref responds within our test, as opposed to a new one created within the method that we have no access to from the test. Set the title, set the task, and task should be null here because we didn't pass one in because we're testing the create scenario for the purposes of this. Then listen to the promise and have a result handler. So then we detect changes, which forces everything to draw, and then when stable. This is so task components being created. I'm just going to hit play. So here we go again. Now the thing is stable, and component.taskGrid we see down here is actually a task grid component. So it's been created, whereas previously it wasn't. We're going to call the close, but that doesn't do anything until it's stable again. So we're going to run detect changes. Then once again, we're waiting for when stable to do our exceptions. I'm going to play. Oh, and now it's been stabilized and it's running the result handler here. Task is null, so it's going to push that result, which is the new task that would have been created in the pop-up. It's going to push that on JavaScript tasks and refresh the task grid. And now we have all our assertions and we call the done. The done says, hey, this method is finished. And we have something. So expect 14 to be 1. So I'm going to change that. That's because the underlying services are mock services, which I'm not sort of intercepting in this code. And that's, you can read all about that stuff in the book, but those are the default services that run. So I'm going to change that to 14, and that was, yeah, that should be, let's try that again. So component tasks after loading the default services is going to be probably the 14 original items that are or 13 original items that are in the main are basically our mock data source, built all in TypeScript. Get rid of that. And component task grid, let's tasks. Yeah, it's 13. So our new one is added to it. It's probably actually not going to be added at position 0, so that's going to be another failure this time around. So the same line is going to fail. Well, length is property, but so let's do -1 dot length minus -1. And we'll run this again one more time. Third time is the charm. Took me 3 times to finish all the issues in episode 1 too. On refresh, inside the result handler for closing the pop-up, and length is 14. Boom, perfect. So what I did here is I'm introspecting into the tasks array on the task grid class or component, and then I'm using the length of that same array, and of course arrays are 0 indexed, so I'm subtracting 1 from the length to get the last item on the tasks, and make sure it is equal to the task instance that we passed in the close modal. So this approach using the done is actually my preferred approach when trying to build this stuff out, because it doesn't rely on anything internal to Angular. It's all part of Karma and Jasmine. That completes my session on how to use a done function to test asynchronous code within Angular, Karma, and Jasmine. In the next session, I'm going to look at a JavaScript staple, the use of async and await. I hope you'll stick around to watch that.